Today we're kicking it old school with a classic smoked pork butt on the Hasty Bake grill. Thanks for continuing to join us for these every week, guys. We're super excited to continue to pump them out. We've had a lot of requests on YouTube and on Facebook to kick some things back old school, to do some real traditional recipes that a lot of times get overlooked with some of these fun, kind of creative, different things we like to do. So we're going to start doing some of those. We did some ribs a little while ago. We're going to do a traditional smoked pork butt today. We're going to keep it real simple, but there's a lot of people who are new to barbecue, they're new to smoking, they want to get into these things and they don't really know where to start, and pork butt is always my recommendation of where to start. Smoked pork butt is super easy to prepare. It doesn't require a lot of trimming. It doesn't require a lot of crazy seasonings or injections or anything like that. And it kind of cooks itself once you get it on a well-managed grill. So what we're going to be doing today is covering this pork butt with a salt, pepper, garlic blend called Cattle Call. Keeping it very simple. We're going to be throwing it on the grill at around 275 to 300 degrees, but I got a little trick that's going to make this thing cook a lot faster for you. A lot of people think pork butt's going to take 10, 12, 14 hours, and if you keep a gigantic whole, a 10 or a 12-pound pork butt whole, it very well might take that long. But there's absolutely no reason to keep this thing whole in order to maintain some juiciness to it. We can actually cook it a lot faster and get a lot better bark if we simply cut this pork butt in half and trim it down. So that's what we're going to do today. This butt right here weighs about 8.5 pounds. It's a fairly standard size pork butt. I like buying bone-in pork butts because I feel like they cook more consistently. Now you don't have to leave the bone in, you can take it out. We're going to leave it in today, but we are going to increase the surface area that we can get our bark on by cutting this butt in half. Now there's a couple ways you can do it. You can cut it right down the middle, but you do have to be aware of that bone, or you can kind of open it up like a book, which is what I like to do. So I locate that pork bone, which is right here, and it's kind of like an arrow that points over here to the money muscle. If you take a look at this pork butt, you have a couple different sections of it. Right here in the middle, you're going to have some tubes that are the most juicy, tender, amazing part of that entire pork butt. When you shred it up, they're the nice long pieces that stay unbelievably juicy. On this side, we have what competitors call the money muscle. Money muscle is probably the most tender. It's kind of the filet mignon of the pork butt. And if you look at this bone right here, it always points toward the end where the money muscle is. So we're going to come in here on this pork butt, and I'm going to use this bone as a guide, kind of like an arrow, and I'm going to open this thing up like a book. Now like I said, there's a million different ways you can cut pork butts in half. One of the reasons I like cutting it like this rather than straight down the middle is I feel like you get a much better increased yield on your bark because you're increasing the surface area lengthwise rather than up and down. So I open it up, you find where that bone's going to be, and you just err on the inside of the bone there. Now we have two pieces that are longer and wider, a little bit flatter. You have more surface area to get your bark on, which is what we're going to be doing next. We're just going to take a look at these and see if they require any trim up at all. This one's got just a little bit of hanging on fat. There's not going to be a lot of trimming that we do. The one thing to remember is if you have a lot of fat buildup, so a really, really heavy fat cap or any big clumps, when you're cooking at 275 or 300, the hope is that you're going to get most of that fat rendered, but sometimes it might not. So anything that's really, really thick, like you can see this thick fat cap right there, I'm just going to go ahead and trim that down a little bit, because when I go to pull this at the end, some of that fat might not render, and I'm going to have to pull it out, and I might as well not try to cook it if I'm just going to pull it out at the very end. So just looking around, seeing if there's anything else I need to be aware of. This one looks pretty good. This one looks pretty good. This one's actually going to cook very quick because the bone's in it. You can see these long striations. That's going to yield some really good meat. Here's that fat cap we talked about. It's a little thick for me, so I'm just going to trim it down. You actually don't have to do much trimming at all. Some people will take an entire pork butt with no knife at all, season it up, and throw it on the grill. But again, we really like to do just a little bit of trimming, a little bit of cutting to make this thing cook a lot faster. Right now it's about 12 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm shooting to have this thing for dinner. I'm anticipating it being on the smoker for about 5.5, maybe 6 hours. We'll put it to bed, rest it for about an hour. We'll eat around 7 o'clock tonight. So it's a fairly quick cook on a full-size pork butt. And all we're going to do from now that we're all trimmed, is we're just going to come back here with some seasoning. You can season pork butt with whatever you like. I like to try to keep it real basic with a salt pepper blend. This one's called Cattle Call. We like it quite a bit. Even a 50-50 blend of kosher salt and coarse ground black pepper will do a really good job of getting this thing coated. Now remember, this is a thick cut of meat, so you can put a lot of seasoning on the outside and it's not going to overwhelm it, because by the time this gets shredded, all that seasoning gets mixed in, and you have to have enough seasoning to distribute to hit all the meat that's on the inside. So I really coat heavy. I mean, heavy to the point where you almost can't see the color of the meat underneath it. It's not a problem. Some of it'll get knocked off. Most of it's going to soak in and tender up. And it's also going to give us a phenomenal bark, which is, again, one of the reasons we cut this in half, other than cooking it in half the amount of time, is all this seasoning on the outside gives us a killer bark that when we mix it up, we'll get bark in every bite, rather than just some chunks of bark and all the shred. It doesn't get any more simple to prepare than that. We're going to take this, we're putting it on the smoker behind me. We're cooking on the Hasty Bake Hastings as we normally do. 275 to 300 is the goal today. So we're going to try to maintain that temperature. After about 3.5 hours or so, we'll more than likely come back and wrap this up, get it all nice and tender, put it to bed, let it kind of bake itself to perfection. Again, we're shooting for about a 6-hour cook time and a 1-hour rest. We'll see how true that holds up. But right now, these are going on the smoker. I like to start these pork butts fat side down. I think it gives a little bit more heat and allows that fat to begin the render process. We'll flip them a couple times throughout the cook to make sure they all brown up nice, but right now we're going fat side down, using that fat as an insulator, trying to get as much smoke as we can in this thing before we wrap it up. All right, so this pork butt that we've been cooking today has been on for exactly 4 hours right now. I just ran an internal temperature on it. Depending on the piece, we're talking about an internal temp of about 170 to 183, which is about 3/4 of the way done. We're gonna wrap this thing for probably about the next hour to hour and a half, and it's gonna take it right up to the temperature we want, which is around 203, or probe tender when you're using your internal thermometer. In order to wrap, we got our good heavy duty foil right here. We're gonna double layer. I always like to double layer my foil when it wraps. The grill's a little rough environment. Some things can get torn on it. It's just better to keep all the juices in. We're gonna wrap this nice and tight. Remember, the tighter you wrap it, the better you preserve your bark. If you end up wrapping it real loose, all the juice that's inside can kind of pool on the bottom. It'll bubble, it'll boil, and it'll steam all your bark away. But if you wrap it really tight, it's gonna keep all the juice inside the meat itself. It's gonna keep the bark really nice and firm. These are going to go back on the cooker until they hit that magic temperature of around 200 to 205. 203 is pretty common for most people to remember. We're looking for probe tender on the inside. There's still going to be offset in there. Our grill temp right now is around 290 degrees. All right, guys, the pork butt is off. It's rested for a total of about an hour. So just to kind of go over our timeline again, we put this stuff on at 12 o'clock. I pulled it off at 5 o'clock exactly. So it smoked for 5 hours. We wrapped it about the halfway mark, so about 2.5, 3 hours in, we went ahead and wrapped it and left it wrapped for the remainder of that 5 hours. I pulled it off. I just opened the package just to vent it so the cooking process kind of ended, and then I put it in a cold oven, so an oven that was not turned on, and just let it sit there for about an hour. The reason we let it sit is the reason we let any kind of meat rest, is we want to redistribute all those juices that are in the middle of the meat so everything ends up really, really tender. We cooked this thing at around 290 to 300 degrees today. Now, it's a very, very fast cook, and I know what a lot of you guys are thinking. Well, normally a pork butt takes 8, 10, 12 hours, and yes, it does if you leave it whole. But I'm telling you right now, there is no scientific reason why you need to leave that pork butt whole. Now, your favorite barbecue restaurant may cook it for 12 or 14 hours and leave it whole, but they have a lot of other meat that's going on their big smokers at the same time, and they have to cook all that meat at the exact same temperature. So sometimes the timeline just works out that they end up smoking it longer. But if you're doing 1 or 2 pork butts, it's really easy to get it done in a shorter amount of time at home, and I promise you, you're going to end up with more bark because you're able to increase your service area. So these pork butts are done resting. We're going to go ahead and open them up now, see how they turned out. I like to put them in a foil pan just to make sure nothing's leaking, and then I pull everything out of the foil. and I dump it into that foil pan because all those juices that are in the bottom of the pan, I want to be able to save and mix back in with all the meat so we get all that flavor. There's no reason to waste it. Now, one thing that always cracks me up whenever I'm watching people do videos of pulled pork online is they pull out these massive meat shredders. They're made out of plastic or metal. They look like bear paws. And they're pulling and they're tugging with these massive bear claws, and they're acting like, look how tender my meat is. Guys, if you're having to use bear paws, you didn't cook your meat long enough. This right here is going to have a bone that pulls out real smooth, and I'm literally just going to be able to smash it. And that's when you know you've reached the right temperature for pulled pork, to be tender, to have all the fat and all the stuff that's inside to render and break down. And I'm making this a super, super moist, tender cut. I'm gonna pull my phone out so I can get some close-ups. The bone comes out clean. Right, we're gonna start shredding this. I want you to pay attention to just how easy this is when you do it with your hands. You don't need the shredders, you don't need the claws. If you cooked it long enough and you let it do the right rest, this is how tender it's going to end up. Now, some people will take this and they'll put it on a chopping block and they'll dice it even smaller. You can do that if you'd like. I actually like to leave my pork what I kind of call rustic, so a little bit bigger chunks. I think it holds on to sauce and toppings better. I think it makes it a little bit beefier of a sandwich, but you can do whatever you want to do. There's not really a wrong way when it comes to how you want to do this. Now, we talked before about those tubes that you'd see in the middle of there. This right here are those tubes. So you see them run lengthwise. We call that pitmaster candy around here because that right there is going to be one of the best bites you can get out of this pork butt. Kind of roll them up. So juicy. So smoky, even with just that first 3 hours of smoke on it. One thing that's really noticeable when you do pork at this heat with being able to separate the meat like we did is we end up with a lot more bark than we did if we just had the outside of the whole pork butt. You're able to almost double your bark, which means you get all that extra flavor and goodness on the sandwich that you're making without having to add extra sauce or add any more seasoning. We'll sauce this sandwich just a little bit, just because it looks pretty. It adds a little pop of flavor, but I don't like to over sauce anything. I like to let the meat do the work. We put all the time and the energy into making this meat awesome. I don't like to cover it up with too much. I think we've been through to most of it here. Now, what I'll normally do is after I pull all this pork, I let it sit covered for about 5 or 10 minutes just to let the rest of the juice kind of soak down. Then I give it one more spin to make sure all that moist meat is kind of mixed up and in there. So we'll do that right now. Come back. We're going to make a sandwich. All right, we're back. We're going to go ahead and build this sandwich. I know this seems real basic, but just highlight a couple things. One, I like to put some homemade pickles on my sandwich. So these came out of my garden. Pickles go great on pulled pork. You got a lot of fat that's coming off that meat, so that vinegar and that acid cut it really well. I just do a little bit of sauce on that top bun. And when I'm getting this meat ready, I'm looking for a couple things. I like to try to get a little bit of everything. So I want to get some tubes in here. I want to get a good amount of bark in here. I want to make sure I build that sandwich nice and high. So there's some tubes there. I do actually sort through and pick the right pieces, because if you put too much bark on a sandwich, it's going to end up being too salty or too peppery. So you got to find the right blend of everything for that sandwich. The good thing with pulled pork is you can stack it pretty high because it kind of sticks to each other. To pile that sandwich as high as you want to pile it. Top it with just a little bit more barbecue sauce. That, my friends, right there is a pulled pork sandwich. We made it in 6 hours with the trusty Hasty Bake behind us. Cooked it pretty quick, not very hot at all, got tons of smoke in it. You gotta love the convection you get off those Hasty Bake grills. They can make everything get done so much quicker. So that is traditional pulled pork. We had a lot of requests for that recipe. You can tell it's not very hard to do. You can actually do it, maybe not on a weeknight, but on a half-day weekend, if you will. You know, you got a Saturday afternoon, it's perfect time to throw one of those pork butts on, get it done in time for dinner. So we're gonna tear into this sandwich real quick, let you know how it turned out. Wow. Nice refreshing pop on the pickle. Some little bit of sweetness from that sauce, some pepper and salt from that bark. A nice tender bun. juicy, smoky. Start cooking your pork butts like this. See what you like. See if you like that extra bark. See if you like that extra time you're getting back on your timeline and your schedule. Promise you it's going to be hard to go back once you can get that kind of pulled pork sandwich in 6 hours. Thanks for joining us. Like, follow, subscribe. Do all the things you're supposed to do on social media to keep up with us. We want to keep up with you. Send us your photos. Hope you guys are trying these recipes at home and enjoying them as much as I'm enjoying this. Have a great week. You guys mind? I'm just gonna stay here and keep eating this. Not like until it's done. Yeah, like, it's fine. I'm just gonna eat it. No, really. I'm just gonna eat it, the whole thing. I'll build another one for pictures. Yeah, it's that good.